A 7-year-old black girl, wearing an old backpack, walked into the 50-story building of Meridian Enterprises. In the early morning light, Emma Harrison stood tall, gripping the worn leather briefcase that held her mother's documents. She walked in, her eyes full of determination, despite the curious stares around her. The Meridian headquarters, a towering glass building, reflected the sunlight, making everything around it shimmer. Emma Harrison, standing barely 4 feet tall, was in front of the building. Dressed in a green dress and a white sweater, prepared by her mother, she looked like a stark contrast between a modern corporation and a young girl carrying a much heavier responsibility than her age suggested. "You can do it," Emma whispered, her small hand tightly clutching the old leather briefcase that contained all of her mother's hopes and dreams. Despite the stares of discrimination because of her black skin, she continued walking with a strong belief in herself. In the vast lobby, executives, dressed in expensive clothes, moved around like puppets of the system. Emma, small and alone, stood among them, her voice quiet but firm as she called out the name of the person she was there to meet, drawing the attention of everyone around her. The receptionist, Diane, looked up in surprise. "Sweetie, are you here alone?" "Where are your parents?" She looked directly into Diane's eyes, unshaken. "My mom is Rebecca Harrison. She has an interview with Mr. Reynolds. I'm here in her place." Diane looked at the girl, her face concerned. "Honey, it doesn't work like that. Your mom has to be here in person. She can't be replaced." Emma, her eyes full of worry, answered firmly, "My mom is sick. She's in the hospital, but she needs this job. I have to do it for her." Alexander Reynolds, the CEO of Meridian, was walking through the lobby when he overheard this unusual conversation. His gaze stopped when he saw the girl. His attention was caught by Emma, who appeared fragile but full of determination. Alexander Reynolds, the CEO of Meridian Enterprises, was a powerful man known for his cold head and sharp strategies. In the Chicago business community, he never compromised, keeping his schedule intact no matter what difficulties anyone else faced. "Diane, how's it going?" Reynolds' deep voice echoed in the cold lobby space, creating an unsettling atmosphere. "Mr. Reynolds, this little girl says she's here in place of her mom for a project manager interview," Diane said, confusion clearly written on her face. Reynolds, staring at the black girl, his sharp eyes filled with curiosity, couldn't hide his surprise. At 45, with salt and pepper hair and an imposing figure, he made even the most experienced executives feel uneasy. But in his eyes, this little black girl was nothing. "Little girl, what's your name?" Reynolds asked, his blue eyes never leaving Emma. "Sir, Emma Harrison," she replied, meeting his gaze. She remembered her mother's words. "Look them in the eyes when you speak, even if they think you don't matter." A flicker of interest appeared on Reynolds' face, but he quickly regained his cold demeanor. "So, where's your mom?" "My mom is in the hospital at Northwestern Memorial," Emma said, her voice steady though slightly trembling. "She has pneumonia, but the doctor says she'll be fine in a few days." Emma carefully opened the briefcase, her small hand handing Reynolds her mother's job application. Her gaze was unwavering. "My mom stayed up all night to prepare the presentation before she had to go to the hospital." Reynolds glanced at his watch, then looked down at the girl. Despite everything about company logic and protocol that forbade this, he couldn't help but feel drawn to the girl's determination and unexpected intelligence. "Emma Harrison," he said, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. "I've conducted over 5,000 interviews in my career, but this is the first time a little black girl is here interviewing for her mom." He extended his hand, inviting her to his office. "Come on up. Let's see what this little one has prepared in place of her mother." Diane gasped, unable to believe her eyes as Reynolds led Emma to the executive elevator. "Sir," Emma said as the doors closed, her voice full of confidence, "Mom said I'm too young for coffee, but I know how to make it if you want." For the first time in years, Alexander Reynolds actually smiled, but it wasn't the smile he had imagined. This unexpected meeting had changed everything. Reynolds, his sharp blue eyes, gestured for Emma to sit in the luxurious chair opposite his vast desk. Morning light streamed through the windows, reflecting his achievements on the wall. But Emma couldn't help but feel the chill in the air. The images and magazines filled with accolades seemed to emphasize the gap between two worlds. His world, and the world of the black girl sitting in front of him. Nuance. So, Emma, he said, his deep voice echoing across the large room, tell me about your mother's qualifications. His gaze was sharp, as if scrutinizing every small detail, but Emma remained confident, despite the clear discrimination in his eyes that made her feel like an unworthy child. Emma carefully opened the leather folder, her small hands flipping through her mother's job application. My mom was a project manager for 8 years at Westlake Solutions, before they shut down, she answered, though her words received no respect from those around her, simply because she was a black girl. She has a PMP certification and an MBA from Northwestern. Emma continued, her eyes shining with pride. Reynolds raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by the girl's knowledge. But deep inside, he still couldn't shake the feeling that a black child like her shouldn't be here. And why does your mom want to work at Meridian? Reynolds asked, his eyes filled with skepticism. Because we need health insurance, Emma replied, her voice steady. And because your company helps people. Her blunt answer caught Reynolds by surprise, as most candidates would have spoken about career advancement opportunities. But this girl spoke about health insurance instead. Emma's straightforwardness took Reynolds aback. Other candidates typically talked in circles about company culture and growth opportunities. But this girl focused on what truly mattered to her family. Something that people in the company, especially those with power, often overlooked. My mom is really good at her job, Emma continued, pulling out a stack of project reports. These are my mom's success stories, she said, her eyes brimming with pride. She stayed up all night to prepare the presentation, even though she was sick. Emma's words painted a picture of a strong black mother, but in the world Reynolds lived in, that image seemed unappreciated. Reynolds flipped through the documents, each page marking Rebecca Harrison's impressive accomplishments. A question lingered in his mind, but it was undeniably prejudiced. Who takes care of you when your black, single mother is in the hospital? Emma's expression faltered slightly, but she quickly regained her confidence. Mrs. Winters from next door came to visit me this morning, but she's too old. I take care of myself. I pack my own lunch for school. Though young, Emma carried the weight of everything without complaint, facing the deprivation from her black family that she had endured. A heavy feeling washed over Reynolds. Where's your father? He asked, a hint of contempt in his voice. He left when I was little. My mom said he wasn't ready to be a father. The words seemed to make it hard for him to comprehend how a black child could grow up strong under such circumstances. Emma shrugged as if talking about the weather. It's just us, but we're a great team. For Emma, there was no concern for the discriminatory remarks because she had grown used to deprivation and the need to be independent from a young age. Reynolds had done his research on the girl. Though she was only 7, she spoke fluently and carried the responsibilities of an adult. Emma's resilience was like a small flame in a world full of prejudice and discrimination. There was something in Emma's determination that made Reynolds recall old memories. Memories of a man who had hurt the woman who loved him, while she had to struggle with everything just because of her skin color. A moment, Reynolds said, then pressed the intercom. Janet, cancel my morning meeting. His assistant's voice came through, filled with unmasked astonishment. Sir, you have a presentation at 11 o'clock. Reynolds nodded, not concerned about the important meeting. Instead, he thought about what he could do to help this girl and her mother. Emma's eyes widened, a glimmer of hope in them. Are you going to visit my mom? Yes, Reynolds replied without hesitation. I need to meet the woman who raised such an extraordinary girl. Reynolds found himself captivated by Emma's resilience, a black girl facing the world with unwavering strength. As they descended in the elevator, Emma looked up, her bright eyes sparkling with curiosity. Mr. Reynolds, why are you helping us? Her sudden question made Reynolds stop abruptly, struggling to answer. My mom always said that busy, important people like you don't have time for people like us. Her words were a painful reminder of the societal divide between those in power and people like this black girl. Let's just say you've done what most of my executives couldn't do. You've captured my full attention, Reynolds said, his voice betraying his surprise. Black children like Emma weren't supposed to earn his attention, yet this girl had made him reconsider everything. Emma smiled, showing her missing front tooth, her eyes full of unshakable trust. She took Reynolds' hand, a simple gesture, but one full of strength. That trust confused Reynolds, as for the first time in his life, he felt genuine sincerity from a black child, a generation he once thought was insufficient. The Northwestern hospital buzzed with voices and hurried footsteps, but Reynolds, in his expensive suit, felt out of place in a world he couldn't control. Despite his imposing appearance, he couldn't ignore the stark contrast between him and the medical staff in their uniforms. He was walking with a black girl, someone whom society had judged with prejudice. "Room 317, the nurse said. But Reynolds wasn't the kind of man to be easily denied. He slid his business card across the counter, his eyes filled with determination. "I need to see Ms. Harrison about an urgent matter," he requested, hesitating at the unusual situation caused by a black child. Emma led the way down the hospital corridor, as if she had been here countless times before. Reynolds, perplexed, wondered, how many times has this black girl walked these halls by herself? It made him think about her strength, a strength he had never known. They arrived at Rebecca Harrison's hospital bed, her chestnut hair messy, with an IV in her arm. Her face was pale. Dark circles under her eyes were visible. Even though she was seriously ill, she resembled Emma so much that Reynolds couldn't help but wonder if her resilience was a reflection of that same black girl. "Emma?" Rebecca's voice was hoarse, slightly confused and worried. "Sweetie, why are you here?" She looked up at Emma and saw an unbelievable sight, her small black girl standing next to Mr. Reynolds, the man she had always thought would never have time for people like them. Rebecca's face turned ashen, clearly not understanding what was happening. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice tinged with panic. Reynolds stepped forward, looking at Emma and commenting, "This girl is incredible. She presented her mom's application so calmly, it was surprising." "I'm truly sorry," Reynolds said, but his voice was firm. Rebecca tried to sit up straight, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Emma, I told you we should have called first, not come here like this." Her words highlighted the deprivation and the shame that Rebecca, a black single mother, faced when trying to pursue a career in a racially discriminatory world. "But she's worked so hard," Reynolds responded, his voice filled with sympathy. "Yes," Emma said, her voice shaking slightly but filled with resolve. "We really need this job." Emma's honest words made the room fall silent, bringing to light the struggles of a black child fighting for a chance to succeed in a society full of prejudice. Reynolds pulled a chair next to the bed. "Ms. Harrison," he began, "your daughter has made a strong impression on me. She told me about your work at Westlake." Rebecca nodded, but a sadness appeared in her eyes. "Yes, I worked there for 5 years, but then they were bought out and downsized. The entire company only saw us as a burden when we carried the responsibility of our families." "Your portfolio is impressive," Reynolds commented. "So why haven't you found a better job with your qualifications?" Rebecca looked at Emma hesitantly, a trace of sadness in her eyes. "Honestly, it's not that simple. As a black single mother with no family support, most employers just see me as a burden." Rebecca's words echoed, highlighting the racism and societal discrimination she faced, even with outstanding qualifications. "They ask me if I'll take time off when Emma gets sick," Rebecca said, her voice growing stronger, unable to hide her frustration. "They don't say it outright, but their concern is clear. I'm a black single mother, and I'm considered a burden." The interviews always ended with the same phrase, "No, we can't hire you because you have a family." Reynolds watched Emma climb onto the bed, instinctively checking the IV in her mother's arm, with the familiarity of someone who had done it too many times. A pang of sorrow swept through him as he thought of his ex-wife, who had to fight alone. "Medical bills don't help," Rebecca sighed, her face showing clear disappointment. This pneumonia couldn't have come at a worse time. A painful memory flashed through Reynolds' mind, one he had tried to suppress. A woman very much like Rebecca, black, struggling alone with life's hardships, determined to raise her child despite society's view of them as a burden. "Ms. Harrison," Reynolds said, his eyes shining with determination, "my decision has been made. When do you think you can recover?" "The doctor says I can be discharged tomorrow if my oxygen levels improve, but it will take at least a week to fully recover." Rebecca's voice trembled as she looked at Reynolds. "After that, we'll do the official interview on Monday." Meanwhile, Reynolds reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. "Have the hospital's billing department contact me at this number," he said, his voice firm but commanding. Rebecca stared at the card, her eyes filled with skepticism. "Mr. Reynolds, I can't accept this. Thank you for your help, but please reconsider. Does Meridian truly care about its employees, especially those like me, who may struggle with both work and raising a child?" As they left, Emma whispered, "Thank you for helping my mom." Her voice trembled but was sincere. Reynolds wondered, why did the gratitude of a black child have such power, stronger than any multi-million-dollar deal he had ever considered important in his life? In the following 5 days, Emma became an integral figure at Meridian Enterprises. Although Rebecca wasn't entirely satisfied, she reluctantly agreed as Reynolds arranged transportation and supervision for Emma. The little girl spent her afternoons in a corner of the office, doing homework and sometimes observing different departments. Emma not only studied but gradually became a sharp observer, offering comments that made department heads reconsider their approaches. On Wednesday afternoon, as she looked up from her math homework when Reynolds stopped by to check on her, Emma spoke about the company's operating profit margins. "We could improve the profit margin by reorganizing the supply chain," she said, with a tone of authority that made Reynolds smile. He couldn't help but smile. "Is that so? And where did you learn about operating margins?" he asked, his gaze never leaving the small black girl in front of him. "My mom explained her work to me," Emma said, her eyes brightening. "She says talking about it helps her think better." Emma tapped her pencil on her notebook, and a small smile appeared on her face. "Also, receptionist Diane gave me business magazines when I was bored," she added. She said, her voice clear but full of mischief. Reynolds leaned against the doorframe, watching Emma with a curious gaze. "Most 7-year-olds read comic books, but this one, she reads business articles. Is Batman your favorite character? Because he helps others without superpowers, right?" A sudden laugh escaped Reynolds, the first one in years, and for a moment, he felt a slight warmth. But then he realized that Emma's simplicity and sincerity had changed everything. By Thursday, Reynolds' executive team began to notice an unusual shift in his behavior. Janet, his assistant of 15 years, checked her watch every day before Emma arrived. "She reminds me of someone," Janet remarked, her sharp eyes scrutinizing Reynolds as if searching for something. "This girl, Emma, she reminds me of someone," Janet said, her sharp gaze passing through Reynolds with deep understanding. "She's like someone I used to know, very similar." Reynolds stiffened, his eyes never leaving Emma. "The girl has remarkable potential," he said, his voice gravelly. "That's all, if you say so." "The board is asking about the meetings I've canceled," Reynolds replied, his voice cold and direct. "They can direct those questions to me." That afternoon, Reynolds accidentally found Emma in the break room, talking with the marketing team. "Details about their latest campaign," she said with confidence in her voice. Despite being just 7 years old, she knew how to persuade adults. "Ms. Harrison," Reynolds interrupted, his tone icy, "I think it's time for your appointment." Although this meeting had become a daily ritual, he couldn't help but feel a huge difference in how Emma and her mother approached the challenges they had to face. This had become their daily ritual. Every day, Emma not only cared for her mother, but also learned and observed the work at Meridian. Though only 7, the little girl had already figured out ways to help her mother move forward in her career. In her office, Emma sat in the chair she had once occupied while reviewing her mother's work. "Mom will be home tomorrow," she said, her eyes lighting up with hope. The nurse said her mom's lungs had improved, but was the price of that sacrifice just more criticism, discrimination, and lack of recognition? "That's great news," Reynolds replied, pushing a glass of chocolate milk across the table. Though he couldn't quite grasp what it meant to a small black girl struggling for recognition in a world where others always viewed her through the lens of prejudice. "Do you still want to meet me after Mom goes to work?" "Here?" Emma suddenly asked, her eyes flashing with doubt, as she had suffered so many times from discrimination simply because of her skin color. That question took Reynolds by surprise, and he couldn't help but feel a powerful emotion stirred by her words. Emma's simple statement hit Reynolds like a blow. Throughout his life, he had faced hostile takeovers, market crashes, and the betrayal of trusted colleagues. But facing a question from a black child, living in a society where racial discrimination was ever present, made him feel that all those struggles were insignificant. But nothing had prepared Reynolds for the incredible honesty and directness of a 7-year-old black girl, a child who wasn't allowed to make mistakes, wasn't allowed to be weak, because society had already decided that she was only worthy of contempt. "Emma," he said carefully, with a compassion he had never felt before, "some people leave because of their own mistakes, not because of anything you've done." This statement seemed like a late realization about what society had imposed on Emma, a child whom society had not acknowledged and treated unfairly just because of her skin color. He had no intention of sharing the photo from that day, the photo of a wife he had lost. The photo had been locked away in his desk drawer for nearly 2 decades, much like the memories buried deep within him, just like the pain he had not acknowledged until he met Emma. But something urged Reynolds to open the drawer and take out the silver frame. "This is my daughter," he said, turning the picture toward Emma. "Her name is Lily." The girl looked at the photo, her green eyes resembling Reynolds' own, but also those of a child who never had the chance to live fully like the girl facing him. Emma studied the picture of Lily, a child smiling innocently, her eyes mirroring Reynolds. "Where is she now?" Emma asked, and her question lingered in the air, a reminder that losses can teach us deeper lessons than any success could. Reynolds' voice grew distant, filled with a sorrow he had never acknowledged. "She and her mother died in an accident a long time ago." He closed his eyes as if trying to avoid the indelible memories of the loss, of a black woman he had forgotten while building his career. "Is that why you sometimes feel sad when you look at me?" Emma's question hung in the air like a fragile crystal, reflecting a harsh truth about the loneliness Reynolds had never confronted. And in that moment, he felt the pain of a black child, deprived of the opportunity to live fully because of the societal prejudices he had unknowingly nurtured. "Definitely not," Reynolds replied, but his voice was not entirely convincing, as if there was something in his words that he no longer believed. Victoria Sloan, Meridian's HR director, stood arms crossed in Reynolds' office on Friday morning. With undisguised disdain, she looked at the documents on Rebecca Harrison. "She's a black single mother with no family support. She's had health issues recently. Should we take the risk?" Although Rebecca's qualifications were solid, her circumstances, a black single mother with no family support and unstable health, raised concerns about the potential legal liabilities that few employers would dare accept. Reynolds continued reviewing the documents, but inside, the racism and sexism echoed like a systematic signal. His expression was numb as he looked at Rebecca's file, a black single mother with no family support, while other candidates had easier circumstances. Victoria emphasized her meticulously manicured fingers. "She's had to miss work several times to take care of her black child in emergencies." Her words subtly highlighted that a black mother would always be seen as a burden in the eyes of society and at the workplace. "The statistical probability of attendance problems is very high," Victoria said, her tone laden with implication, as if defending her stance that a black mother would surely struggle to balance work and family responsibilities. Reynolds put his pen down, his question ringing out with a cold, inscrutable tone. "Have you reviewed her performance evaluations?" He knew well, though Rebecca's expertise was outstanding, society would never accept a black mother with too many family responsibilities. "Yes," Victoria admitted. "She always exceeds expectations, but that doesn't matter as much as the practical concerns of taking care of a black child while holding a significant job." Her words weren't an acknowledgement, but a denial of the abilities and contributions of a black mother in this workplace. "We have qualified candidates without her. A complication," Victoria emphasized, her voice dripping with contempt, as if she were talking about a black mother who couldn't possibly do the job simply because of her family circumstances. "Complications?" Reynolds' voice grew colder, as if he could feel the absurdity of Victoria's reasoning. The idea that a single black woman couldn't bring value to the company. An intelligent, dedicated professional who had successfully managed both a career and raised a well-adjusted black child. But in their eyes, perhaps that was too complicated. Victoria shifted uncomfortably, as if she couldn't bear the presence of a black mother with so many responsibilities. "Alexander, this is not like you," Victoria said, her expression one of disbelief. as if she couldn't fathom that Reynolds would let a black child from an imperfect family change everything. The board is questioning your judgment on this unusual concern, Victoria pressed, her cold words carrying the weight of discrimination, as if Reynolds had done something wrong by listening to and helping a black family. There are rumors, Victoria said, as though implying a social issue Reynolds was unaware of, that a black mother and her child could be problematic in a corporate environment. I don't care about rumors. Results are what matter, Reynolds coldly replied, his eyes lighting up as he remembered the accomplishments Rebecca had made in her job, despite her skin color or family circumstances. Her project management methods helped Westlake save $3 million last year. That's the only factor that matters, Reynolds asserted, highlighting Rebecca's excellence, despite all the prejudices against her and her family. Later that afternoon, James Whitfield, Reynolds' oldest friend, closed the office door behind him. He looked at Reynolds with a worried expression. "Alex, we need to talk," James said, his gaze deep into Reynolds as if he recognized something bigger happening in his friend's personal life. Reynolds looked up from his computer. "If this is about Rebecca Harrison, then yes," James confirmed, but not just because of the work-related reasons, but because of the change in Reynolds that everyone could sense. "But it's not for the reasons you think," James said, as though he knew something deeper, something Reynolds wasn't ready to confront, that a black child had changed everything. "It's not just about finding a qualified project manager, is it?" James asked, his face filled with understanding, knowing that the real reason was that Reynolds was confronting a shift in his own values, something he had always believed in. Reynolds clenched his jaw, feeling anger rise within him. "Her qualifications speak for themselves," he replied, clearly unable to tolerate the societal judgments about Rebecca and her family any longer. "I've known you for 30 years, James," he said softly. "Since Caroline and Lily, I've never seen you this soft. This situation made me realize you've changed, or it's the appearance of a black child you once ignored." "Don't," Reynolds warned, his voice cold, as if trying to push away unnecessary emotions. James gently continued. "You've built such high walls that the board calls you a machine behind your back, with no emotions. But now a black child enters your life and shatters all those walls. Then this black child walks in, and suddenly you have to cancel meetings and arrange hospital bill payments. Things you've never done for anyone before." "What do you mean, James?" Reynolds asked, not understanding why his life had changed because of a black child. "What I mean is, you need to be careful, not just in work, but in your personal life. Sometimes you have to reconsider what you're doing and who you're overlooking." James leaned forward. "If you're seeing the ghosts of what could have been, it's a vulnerable place, because you've never known people like Emma and her family." Reynolds turned toward the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline, where he always saw successful people like himself, but had forgotten about people like Emma, those still fighting every day. "Did you know Emma makes her own lunch? She's only 7, but she does everything. Cares for her mom, looks after herself, and faces this world," Reynolds said, his voice catching. "Since she was 5, she checks her mom's medication schedule and knows how to navigate hospital billing departments. Things a black child has to learn to survive." He shook his head. "She's only 7, James, and she's had to learn more than a child should know." "And Lily would be 19 now," James gently said. But that didn't compare to the injustice Emma was enduring in this world. The ensuing silence was the answer. Enough. Reynolds wondered if these children could help him find his humanity again. After James left, Reynolds opened the drawer and retrieved the silver frame, looking at the picture of Caroline and Lily, the 2 women he had lost. Women he might have loved if it weren't for too much discrimination and pain in his life. Caroline's smiling face looked back at him as she held 2-year-old Lily in her lap. A moment of love that Reynolds had let slip away because of the walls he had built around himself. "What do you think if I get involved in this?" he asked the photo. "Am I seeing ghosts, or is this an opportunity to finally do something right?" Reynolds wondered if he could help Emma without being judged by society. As usual, the photo didn't provide an answer. Only memories of what he had lost, memories of discrimination and the guilt that Reynolds still carried. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Sir, Rebecca Harrison is here. She was discharged this morning and requests to meet with you." Reynolds knew now that he couldn't stand on the sidelines of Emma and her mother's lives. Reynolds carefully placed the photo back in the drawer and led Rebecca in. What would happen next would determine whether the doubts from his executive team had any basis or if something was wrong that was just beginning. Rebecca Harrison stood in Reynolds' office, her expression much brighter than it had been at the hospital, though she still couldn't hide the signs of exhaustion and illness. She wore an old navy blue suit, clearly the best she had, but it had long since gone out of fashion. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, her voice calm despite the clear anxiety in her eyes. "I'm here to personally thank you for your kindness toward Emma and for covering the hospital bills. I will arrange a payment plan." "Please, have a seat," Reynolds gestured to the chair across from him. "No need for repayment. Consider it an investment," Reynolds replied, his voice calm and convincing. Rebecca sat down, her posture straight, but clearly she wasn't comfortable. "An investment must yield returns, Mr. Reynolds. I haven't proven my worth yet," Rebecca responded gently. "Your daughter is truly an excellent ambassador," Reynolds replied with unexpected warmth. "The marketing team is implementing her suggestions about colors, and the break room staff even added chocolate milk to their order." A small smile briefly crossed Rebecca's face, lighting up her tired expression. "Emma has that effect on people. She can talk to anyone," Rebecca said with pride, but her gaze was full of worry. Her expression grew serious. "But I must apologize for putting you in this situation. Emma should have called and rescheduled the interview instead of attending in person," Rebecca said, a hint of embarrassment in her voice. But Reynolds remarked, "We're still here. Sometimes the most important opportunities come from breaking rigid rules." He looked at her for a moment before continuing. "Your official interview is scheduled for Monday, but today I want to discuss something else." Rebecca felt a slight tension, her palms beginning to sweat. Reynolds leaned forward, his sharp gaze fixed on Rebecca. "So why have you persisted in applying for a job at this company, despite being rejected multiple times because of your family circumstances?" Rebecca's eyes flashed with anger, but quickly shifted to determination. "Because I don't want my daughter to think that being a mother makes me less capable at work. I've always excelled, regardless of my personal circumstances," she said, holding her head high and sitting straight in her chair. "And honestly, I need comprehensive health insurance more than so-called inspiring work culture or ping-pong tables in the break room," she continued. Reynolds nodded, showing respect. "That's a practical priority. I respect that." He paused for a moment before asking, "If you're hired, how will you handle emergencies like Emma's illness or school closures?" "Just like I always do, with contingency plans and backup systems," Rebecca answered without hesitation. "I maintain relationships with 3 trusted babysitters, 2 after-school programs, and a network of other working parents to be ready for any emergencies." She leaned forward, her voice becoming firm. "Mr. Reynolds, I understand your concerns. Every employer has these concerns, but they don't realize that single parents are often the most effective employees. We don't have time for office politics or long lunches. We prioritize work ruthlessly, maximizing every minute, because that's the only way we can manage." Reynolds observed her, deeply impressed by her bluntness. Finally, he made a decision that could change the culture of Meridian forever. "Mrs. Harrison, I'd like to offer you the position with a significant change to the standard package," Reynolds said, sliding a folder across the desk. "This is a draft of a pilot program. I will implement flexible work arrangements in emergency childcare support for employees with family responsibilities." Rebecca stared at the folder, her eyes wide with surprise. "I created this for you." "No," Reynolds said quietly. "I created this product because 17 years ago, my wife, Caroline, tried to return to work after our daughter was born. Every company she approached saw the complexity, but didn't recognize her intelligence." He looked directly at Rebecca, his voice deepening. "I was so immersed in building Meridian that I didn't realize how it had destroyed her." Reynolds' words hung between them like a heavy burden. "What happened?" Rebecca asked, her voice gentle but full of curiosity. Reynolds' face tightened with the pain of old memories. "She was driving to another interview when a truck swerved across the median. Emma reminds me of the person Lily could have become." Understanding began to form in Rebecca's eyes. "That's why you're helping us, isn't it?" At first, maybe, he admitted, but your daughter's determination and your capabilities truly matter. This position is yours if you want it. Reynolds extended his hand in invitation. As Rebecca shook his hand, neither of them could have predicted that this decision would not only change their lives, but also the lives of countless other parents at Meridian Enterprises in the years to come. 2 months after Rebecca Harrison joined Meridian Enterprises, the company underwent a noticeable transformation. Rebecca's project management expertise proved invaluable. Her systematic approach helped optimize operations in several departments. The pilot program for flexible working hours expanded beyond her department, with 5 employees participating. This initiative, which Reynolds named the Family First Initiative, showed quarterly forecasts indicating a 12% increase in productivity. Rebecca confidently presented in the executive meeting, standing firm at the head of the table. Her slides clearly illustrated the data. Employee retention rates were up, while sick leave usage had actually decreased. Victoria Sloan, the HR director, who had previously opposed hiring Rebecca, watched with undisguised skepticism. She noted that 2 months was too short to evaluate long-term viability. "What will happen when the novelty wears off?" Rebecca gently countered. "That's why we track data weekly rather than quarterly. We can identify and address issues immediately, instead of waiting for months to realize them." Reynolds observed the exchange with satisfaction. Rebecca had not only proven her excellence, but also skillfully navigated relationships within the company, ensuring consistent results. He declared that this initiative would continue, and any related debates would end here. "Rebecca, I want you to expand this program to include 15 more positions next quarter." That afternoon, Reynolds found Emma at the small desk in the corner of Rebecca's office, where she still did her homework after school. Initially, this arrangement had been met with skepticism, but Reynolds had clarified that employees' children were always welcome in designated areas when necessary. "Mr. Reynolds." Emma looked up from her science project. "Mom is helping Mr. Davidson solve the supply chain issue, just like I said." Reynolds smiled. "I've heard your mom is very impressive." Emma responded matter-of-factly. "She always is." In the past, no one had paid attention to her. That simple remark made Reynolds feel the weight of it. How many talented individuals had been overlooked by American companies simply because their circumstances didn't fit the traditional standards? "Emma," he said, sitting down in the chair beside her desk, "how would you feel about helping me with a special project?" Her eyes widened, full of curiosity. "What kind of project?" "I'm thinking about creating a space at Meridian for children of parents who work late, something like a homework and activity center." "What do you think would make this an ideal space for kids your age?" Reynolds asked. Emma thought carefully about the question. There should be books at different reading levels, quiet spaces in group areas, healthy snacks. Not just cookies, although cookies are the best. And maybe college students could help with homework. Reynolds pulled out his notebook and started jotting down notes. "What about during school breaks?" In the next hour, Reynolds and Emma outlined a plan for what would later become Meridian's famous Bridge program. This would be an on-site childcare and educational support system aimed at revolutionizing work-life integration in American companies. That evening, when Rebecca finished her work, she found Reynolds and Emma enthusiastically talking amidst a pile of sketches and notes. "Should I be worried about these schemes?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "Mom, we're designing a space for kids at Meridian!" Emma exclaimed joyfully. Rebecca raised an eyebrow, looking at Reynolds, and said, "Sounds like it's going to be expensive." He replied, "It's an investment. It's an investment, and it will yield long-term returns." As they entered the elevator together, Rebecca observed Reynolds carefully. She realized that he had changed a lot since the first time they met. "Better or worse?" She smiled and responded, "Definitely better. Now the employees don't call you a machine anymore." Reynolds was surprised. "Have you heard about that?" "Rumors spread quickly in the company," Rebecca laughed softly. "Now they're calling you a revolutionary." As the elevator doors closed, Reynolds pondered that sometimes a revolution doesn't start with grand declarations, but with a simple question from a child. Why can't things be different? What no one at Meridian realized was that the changes within the company had attracted unwanted attention from those who wanted to maintain the status quo, and they were preparing to push back. The quarterly board meeting started like any other, with financial reports and strategy updates. Alexander Reynolds sat at the head of the table, listening intently as James Whitfield reported the latest figures. Total revenue is up 7% compared to last year, James reported. Especially productivity from departments involved in the Family First initiative has increased by 22%. Some board members nodded in approval, but Gerald Harrington, the oldest member of the board and a former CEO of Meridian, cleared his throat loudly. While these numbers are impressive, Harrington said, I'm still hearing concerns about the company culture. His voice carried the weight of 30 years with Meridian. There's a sense that we're becoming more of a daycare center than a leading financial services firm, Reynolds replied, keeping his tone neutral. Could you clarify? Harrington asked, listing out kids in the office, flexible working hours, the ability to work remotely. These might appeal to a certain demographic, but our main clients expect stability and tradition. Morgan Stanley wouldn't bring sippy cups to meetings with clients, he added, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Victoria Sloan nodded in agreement. I've received complaints from senior employees about the noise and disruptions, particularly from department heads. Just yesterday, a junior analyst was caught playing catch with a child in the east hallway of the building. That was my daughter, Reynolds said softly, his voice growing somber. It was just a math game I developed to help her learn multiplication tables, Reynolds continued, his tone tinged with frustration. The room fell silent. Alex Harrington leaned forward, his tone turning serious, with a concern that was sharp but also cold. No one doubts your authority when it comes to implementing new programs, he said, but there's a lot of chatter about your personal investment in the Harrison family situation. People are questioning your objectivity, Harrington continued. A cold wave seemed to engulf Reynolds. The emotional armor he had worn for years suddenly felt fragile. My life and personal investments are irrelevant, Reynolds replied firmly. He answered calmly, the data speaks for itself. If our goal is to maximize value for shareholders, then this initiative has proven its effectiveness, he added, as the tension in the room seemed to ease slightly. But Reynolds knew this was just the beginning of a long battle. After the meeting, James paused, quietly observing Reynolds. Gerald isn't the only one with concerns about this, Alex, James said, his gaze full of worry. Victoria has been gathering all the information, documenting every little incident involving kids on campus, and tracking any delays in projects due to shift workers, James added. Let her do it, Reynolds responded coldly. The data supports our point of view. James warned him, his tone serious. The issue isn't just the data, it's about power and perception. Gerald still has strong influence with the older members of the board, James continued. They see these changes as a rejection of the company they built, he said, his voice laced with displeasure. Reynolds quietly gathered his papers. Maybe it's time for the company they built to move forward, Reynolds muttered to himself. That evening, Reynolds drove himself to Rebecca's modest home in Lincoln Park instead of returning to his familiar penthouse. Rebecca had insisted on inviting him for dinner just to thank him for taking the time to help Emma. The scene in the cozy home greeted him with a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere he had left at the office. Emma opened the door, wearing an apron, proudly announcing that she had helped her mother make lasagna. The small, warm home bore the traces of a happy, fulfilling life. Books were stacked on the table, a science project occupying most of the dining table, and framed artworks by Emma adorned the walls. Sorry about the mess, Rebecca laughed, stepping out of the kitchen. We didn't think the science project would get so big. It's a volcano, Emma said, eagerly explaining. It really erupts, she added. Reynolds couldn't help but smile, feeling the genuine joy from Emma. I'll definitely stand back during the demonstration, Reynolds said, grinning. At dinner, he felt himself relax, something he rarely allowed himself to do. The conversation flowed easily, from Emma's school adventures to Rebecca's work, without the need for the calculated exchanges he was used to at the office. After Emma finished her homework, Rebecca remarked, "You're really different." Reynolds stayed silent, thinking about her comment. I've spent a decade building a solid professional image. It became a habit, a protective shield for me, she said softly. I understand that, because I've built a shield too. As a single mother working in a corporate America, You create your own armor, she added, her eyes tinged with concern. There was something in the way she spoke that made Reynolds feel both worried and comforted. The board is pushing back against these changes, he admitted, the anxiety starting to show. They're using me and Emma as evidence of my loss of objectivity, he confessed, his voice tinged with fatigue. Rebecca's expression tightened, her eyes shifting from concern to determination. I can request to be moved to another department, remove myself from this initiative, she said in a low, serious voice. Reynolds interrupted, his tone decisive. No, absolutely not. This will prove their criticisms right. We'll continue with the plan as set. What he couldn't admit, even to himself, was the unease he felt as Rebecca and Emma began to break the mold he had always maintained. He warned that they must always be prepared. Corporate politics could shift unexpectedly and turn treacherous. Rebecca's smile held a sharpness he hadn't expected. Mr. Reynolds, I've been a single mother for 7 years. No company in America could present a greater challenge than having to raise a child and work full-time, she replied. As he drove home, Reynolds realized that he had revealed more about the board's internal decisions to Rebecca than he had with most of the other executives. What was even more troubling was that he now realized the fear of losing his professional reputation, something that had always been his top priority, seemed less important than the temporary connection he had built with Rebecca. And Emma, as Reynolds was lost in thought about the changes, the phone rang, bringing news that would make the upcoming conflict more intense than anyone could have imagined. Mr. Reynolds, you need to see this right away. Janet's voice carried urgency as she placed the tablet on his desk the following morning. The headline of the Wall Street Journal article read about the personal struggle of the CEO of Meridian, questioning whether he was pursuing innovation or merely grappling with a midlife crisis. The article quoted anonymous sources within the company, suggesting that Reynolds' close relationship with a female employee and her daughter was impacting his judgment, raising the question of whether unresolved personal pain was clouding his decision-making. The article especially criticized the Family First initiative, calling it a waste of resources, a distraction from Meridian's core business goals, driven more by Reynolds' personal motivations than by any strategic reasoning. Who leaked this information? Reynolds asked, his tone cold and tense. It's hard to pinpoint, but the details about your wife and daughter, not many people could have accessed this information, Janet replied. Reynolds' phone started ringing nonstop. Board members, major clients, and industry partners were all demanding explanations. By noon, Meridian's stock had dropped by 3 points, and the PR department was in chaos. Victoria Sloan appeared at his office, her face as cold as a carefully chiseled mask, unable to hide her concern. The board has called an emergency meeting at 4 p.m., requiring your presence. She stopped, her gaze heavy with unspoken meaning. They specifically requested Rebecca Harrison attend this meeting. On what grounds? Reynolds asked. They didn't share. Could I know the details? Victoria responded with her familiar, innocent expression. I'm just passing on the message. As soon as she left, Reynolds immediately called Rebecca to warn her. I've seen the article, she said, her voice tight with tension. Emma's teacher called me. Some of the other parents are discussing it. Now it's affecting my daughter. Alexander, she continued. The fact that she used his first name, something she had never done before, showed how serious the situation had become. Rebecca, I'm sorry. I never intended for this, Reynolds replied. I know, she interrupted. But intent doesn't matter when my 7-year-old daughter's hearing about it. The whispers about her relationship with her boss echoed. The implication struck Reynolds hard. The article didn't directly say that Rebecca had agreed, but it planted the idea. You know how these rumors work, she said, her voice sharp. As they entered the emergency meeting room, the atmosphere turned icy. Gerald Harrington sat in the center of the table, along with Victoria and some of the more conservative board members. James Whitfield sat alone across from them. James's presence was a silent statement of support for Reynolds. We'll get to the point, Harrington began once everyone was seated. This morning's article has caused significant damage to Meridian's reputation and stock value. Our phones have been ringing nonstop all day with clients and investors demanding an explanation, Harrington said. Reynolds remained calm as always. These rumors aren't unprecedented, Reynolds replied. Our PR team is handling the misinformation. Victoria immediately intervened. The concern isn't just how the media is covering it. The issue is about judgment and how we're prioritizing things. She turned to Rebecca, speaking coldly. Ms. Harrison, no one doubts your professional competence, but the circumstances under which you were hired and the changes in company policy regarding your personal situation have created a perception problem. Rebecca's body stiffened, her gaze resolute. My situation as a single mother and my daughter's remarkable ability to ensure I didn't miss any opportunities? So what's Meridian's issue? A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Harrington continued. The issue is the appearance of bias and the rapid implementation of these cultural changes without proper vetting. He slid a folder across to Reynolds. We propose suspending the Family First initiative and transferring Ms. Harrison to the Cleveland office to avoid any unnecessary risks. Reynolds didn't touch the folder. The transfer would be a constructive dismissal, and you know that. Victoria added, of course, we'll support her with the relocation. Rebecca's voice broke the tension. Can I ask who leaked information about Mr. Reynolds' family tragedy to the press? The room fell silent. Harrington answered, his tone stiff. This isn't relevant to this process. I disagree, Rebecca countered. This is directly related to the ethical standards of this board. Someone in this room used personal information as a weapon in this power struggle. This is intimately tied to how Meridian operates, Rebecca continued. James Whitfield leaned forward, agreeing. I agree with Ms. Harrison. Before we discuss any changes, we need to address this security breach. Victoria's face tightened. We have no proof of who on the board, Reynolds interjected. We do. He nodded toward Janet, who stood motionless at the door. She disseminated the email chain to the board members. This morning, we identified the leak. This information was sent from Victoria's email to a Wall Street Journal reporter 3 days ago. All eyes turned toward Victoria, her face pale. This can't be, she stammered. Clearly, my email was breached by someone with access to your personal information and confidential files, Reynolds replied, his voice calm yet decisive. This is hard to believe. Reynolds smiled faintly, the first time since the meeting began. I anticipated this move, though I didn't expect it to happen this quickly. The email contains metadata proving its authenticity and origin. Victoria, you're fired immediately. Security will escort you to your office. Harrington's face flushed red, clearly surprised. You can't just fire an executive without the board's consent. Actually, I can, Reynolds interrupted. Ethical violations of this magnitude fall within my purview, unless you're also involved, Gerald. The older man exhaled sharply. Of course not. I would never. All right, Reynolds cut him off. As interim chairman, I propose we adjourn the meeting and reconvene tomorrow to give everyone time to review the evidence thoroughly. As the board members left, some appeared stunned, while others whispered in quiet relief over Victoria's downfall. Rebecca remained seated, silent. You knew this was coming, she quietly remarked when only the two of them were left. Reynolds nodded. I anticipated Victoria's reaction. She's always opposed any policy change, not just the ones involving her. Why didn't you warn me? Reynolds asked. She's deeply hurt, though she always maintains that professional demeanor, Rebecca replied. If you'd been prepared, perhaps there'd be suspicions of collusion. He hesitated. I'm sorry for the impact this had on Emma, although I couldn't have foreseen this. Rebecca gathered her papers, her gaze sharp. She's stronger than you think, stronger than anyone thinks. Rebecca stood firm at the door, looking at Reynolds with determination. With all due respect, I believe in what you're building here, a company where success doesn't require sacrificing family. It had been too long since she left, and Reynolds realized that although the company had achieved victories, those victories felt meaningless when compared to the losses and personal trust he may have compromised. The professional battle was won, but the personal and professional battles were far from over. 3 weeks after Victoria's firing, the controversy had settled down. Meridian's stock had recovered. Media outlets had moved on to newer scandals. The Family Forward initiative not only continued but expanded, adding 25 new positions across various departments. Under Rebecca's management, it became a model program, with comprehensive data tracking productivity and employee satisfaction. Even the previously skeptical members of the board began to see the initiative's value. especially as competitors started implementing similar programs to catch up with Meridian's innovation. Things were running smoothly until one day, Gerald Harrington entered Reynolds' office unannounced, slamming the door behind him. "We need to talk, Alex," he said bluntly, "about your future at Meridian." Reynolds leaned back in his chair. "I don't understand why my future is being questioned." Harrington placed a thick file on the desk, his gaze suddenly sharp. The board had reviewed the leadership process of the company and planned for succession in companies of our size. Reynolds had anticipated this direction and had concerns about his long-term vision for Meridian. The changes he had made recently, though well-intentioned, were a major departure from the identity the company had long built. Reynolds opened the file and found a proposal for him to transfer executive authority within 6 months, with Harrington temporarily stepping in as CEO while a permanent successor was sought. "I see," Reynolds whispered. "The coup has been meticulously planned." Harrington appeared relaxed. "Unnecessary theatrics," he commented. No one doubted Reynolds' contributions to Meridian. Under his leadership for 15 years, the company had flourished. But perhaps it was time to do something, Gerald? To go back to the old policies and discard the clear improvements that were bringing high profits and employee satisfaction? "Live for balance," Harrington corrected, "to ensure that in your personal healing journey, you don't change the entire corporation just because of your personal regrets." His words struck precisely, as if exposing the weaknesses Reynolds had tried to hide for so long. "My personal journey is irrelevant," Reynolds replied coldly. "The statistics speak for every change I've made." Harrington sighed. "The numbers aren't everything, Alex. Culture matters. Tradition matters. The expectations of our long-standing clients matter." He paused, then added, "And your relationship with the Harrison family has created complications far beyond the statistics." "I don't have a relationship with the Harrison family," Reynolds counted the words carefully. However, even he felt that the denial sounded unconvincing. "Don't you think so?" Harrington asked gently. "You've been photographed at their events. You've dined at their home multiple times. And you've built a company initiative starting from solving their problems." "I'm simply supporting a valuable employee and recognizing the broader potential to apply that support," Reynolds corrected. "Any personal connections are irrelevant." Harrington looked at him for a long moment. "The board meeting is at 2 p.m. on Friday. You have until then to think about the transition proposal. If you oppose this, Alex, things will get worse. The media will dig into your personal history, your relationship with the Harrison family. Do you really want Emma to get caught up in this battle again?" After Harrington left, Reynolds sat still, thinking about his choices. He could fight. He still had allies on the board, and his track record worked in his favor. But Harrington was right about one thing. A public fight would inevitably drag Rebecca and Emma into the spotlight. As though summoned by his thoughts, a light knock on the door interrupted him, and Emma peeked her head in. "Mr. Reynolds, Mom asked me to bring you my science fair results to show you." She ran in, holding a ribbon and pictures of her volcano experiment. For the next 15 minutes, Reynolds listened attentively to each word Emma said about the chemical reactions in her project. Her face lit up with excitement, and that simple joy made the company's scheme seem insignificant. "Emma," he began when she paused to take a breath, "what would you think if I no longer worked at Meridian?" She looked at him, her face becoming serious. "Would you go work for another company?" He answered honestly. "Or I could start something new." Emma thought for a moment. "Will we still see each other?" she asked. "Mom said you're her mentor, but I think you're also our friend." That simple question led to the decision he had been avoiding for so long. His position at Meridian, the company he had built, and the career he had carefully nurtured, suddenly became less important than the connection he had with Emma and her mother. "Yes," he answered confidently, "we'll definitely still see each other." That evening, Reynolds called Rebecca. "I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet tomorrow?" "Is it about the ultimatum from Harrington?" she asked, surprising him with her understanding. "How did you know?" he asked back. "The executive floor has thin walls and Janet always keeps me informed," Rebecca replied. "She's very protective of you." Reynolds smiled, though he didn't want to. "Clearly, I'm the last to know about this coup." "It's not a coup yet," Rebecca corrected. Just an attempt at one. She paused for a moment before continuing, Alexander, whatever you decide, don't make a decision just to protect Emma and me. We've already survived the politics of business. It's not just that, she said. It's about deciding what's more important, the company I built or the future I can create. Silence enveloped them, filled with both possibility and uncertainty. Let's meet tomorrow for dinner, Rebecca finally said. Emma's making her famous spaghetti. We can talk after she's asleep, Rebecca added. And when Reynolds hung up, he realized that for the first time since losing Caroline and Lily, he was no longer making decisions based on regret about the past, but rather hope for the future. No matter what happened with Meridian, something fundamental had changed in his life. He no longer looked back at the past, but was now looking forward. What he didn't know was that the next day, a crucial discovery would change everything. A manila envelope was delivered at 10:37 a.m., labeled private and confidential for Alexander Reynolds. Janet placed the envelope on his desk, her gaze curious, but she didn't ask any questions. One of the reasons he respected her discretion. Inside, Reynolds found documents from Gerald Harrington's private records, including a copy of a board meeting, minutes from 18 years ago, personnel files, and an internal memorandum. A simple note on paper read, "You need to understand what you're really dealing with. A friend." As Reynolds read through the documents, his hands began to shake. The documents revealed a systematic policy implemented during Harrington's tenure as CEO, a policy aimed at recruiting and retaining women of childbearing age, especially those who had children. A memorandum from Harrington to the HR director at the time stated, "While we can't discriminate openly, we can apply performance metrics that will disadvantage employees with family obligations. This ensures our workforce remains focused and unaffected." Another document listed female employees who had been pregnant while working at Meridian, along with notes tracking their departure, all within 18 months after returning from maternity leave. This pattern was undeniable and intentional. What was most disturbing was the specific mention of Caroline Reynolds in a board presentation from 2 decades ago. Our CFO's wife, Caroline Reynolds, requested to return part-time after her maternity leave. However, this proposal was denied as it would set a problematic precedent for other executive wives. Reynolds sat down, memories of the old days flooding back like a wave. Caroline's frustration when she tried to return to work after giving birth to Lily, her disillusionment as company after company refused her request for flexible work, and the arguments when he suggested she should just stay home and care for Lily, like the wives of other executives. The final document in the package was a clipped article about the accident that took Caroline and Lily's lives, along with a handwritten note that appeared to be from Harrington. A tragic outcome. Ensure AR stays focused on work. Distraction is the best way to numb the pain. Reynolds' vision blurred as anger and pain blended together. Over the years, he had blamed himself for being so caught up in building Meridian and not supporting Caroline enough. He had never imagined that his mentor, Harrington, would actively prevent her from returning to work. When Rebecca called to confirm dinner, Reynolds' voice had a peculiar tone that immediately worried her. "What's going on?" she asked right away. He replied, "I need you to see something. Can you come to my office? This is important." An hour later, Rebecca sat across from him, the incriminating documents scattered messily across his desk. "This is..." she began, then fell silent. Reynolds continued, "This is systemic discrimination, intentionally designed to push working mothers out, while still trying to maintain plausible deniability." Rebecca carefully examined each document, her calm demeanor giving way to clear anger. And Harrington was the one behind it all, trying to undermine her because she was too progressive, not just standing behind it, but creating and executing it, seemingly proud of how effective it had been. Reynolds looked straight into her eyes and added, "Including my wife, Caroline." The realization began to appear on Rebecca's face. "That's why this is so personal for me." The family's first initiative was not just about efficiency or doing the right thing. It was about redemption, Reynolds quietly admitted. It was about fixing a mistake he hadn't even realized until today. Rebecca reached across the desk and gently touched his hand, and Harrington was the one behind it all, trying to undermine her because she was too progressive. Not just standing behind it, but creating and executing it, seemingly proud of how effective it had been. Reynolds looked straight into her eyes and added, including my wife, Caroline. The realization began to appear on Rebecca's face. That's why this is so personal for me. The family's first initiative was not just about efficiency or doing the right thing. It was about redemption, Reynolds quietly admitted. It was about fixing a mistake he hadn't even realized until today. Rebecca reached across the desk and gently touched his hand. It was the first time she had physically reached out to him. Alexander, this changes everything, Rebecca said. The board needs to see these documents. Harrington has too many allies, Reynolds countered. They will claim these are old policies and no longer relevant. They'll find a way to minimize and rationalize everything. Then we won't just present this to the board, Rebecca said, her voice stronger now. We'll make it public for everyone to know. What do you mean? Reynolds asked. Transparency, she explained. Complete transparency about the company, including past failures and current reforms. We will publish a comprehensive report on Meridian's historical practices regarding working parents, acknowledging the mistakes of the past and listing measurable improvements from the Progressive Family Initiative. Reynolds pondered the implications. This would be unprecedented. Exactly, Rebecca nodded. No company would willingly expose its past mistakes in such a way. By doing this, we will position Meridian not as a perfect company, but as a brave one committed to progress. This won't just be a corporate policy, it will become a movement. As they discussed the strategy well into the afternoon, Reynolds realized that he admired not only Rebecca's professional knowledge, but also her moral insight. She approached this situation not as a victim of discrimination, but as a strategist determined to create systemic change. As they prepared for dinner, Reynolds spoke. These documents won't just change how we approach the board meeting, they'll change how I understand the last 17 years of my life. Rebecca looked him square in the eyes. What will you do with that understanding? She asked. He admitted, though unsure, that for the first time since losing them, he felt he might be on the right path, the one Caroline would have wanted him to take. That evening at Rebecca's house, Reynolds watched Emma proudly bring out the spaghetti dinner she had made herself, along with garlic bread she had helped prepare. The family scene took him by surprise. This was what he had missed all these years, something he had intentionally distanced himself from after losing his family. After Emma went to bed, Rebecca poured 2 glasses of wine, and she and Reynolds stepped out onto the small balcony overlooking the neighborhood park. Tomorrow will be difficult, she said softly. Harrington won't give up without a fight. I'm prepared for that, Reynolds replied. What I'm less prepared for is what happens after. Rebecca turned back to face him, determination in her eyes. Reynolds chose his words carefully. In the past 17 years, I've built myself around what I've lost and what I created to cover up the pain. Meridian is my identity because I have nothing else left. He paused for a moment. But in the past few months, seeing you and Emma, getting involved in your life, I've realized there are other ways to measure success. Rebecca began cautiously. Whatever happens with Meridian, you've made a real difference. That will help a lot of families, and that's what really matters. He agreed. That's true, but I'm starting to think what's more important is being there for the people right in front of me, not just building a system to help unknown families in the future. The unspoken feeling between them hung in the air, unspoken but clearer than ever. We should focus on tomorrow's battle first, Rebecca finally said, though her gaze held questions about possibilities beyond the company conflict. Reynolds nodded, respecting her boundaries. You're right, one step at a time. As he was about to leave, Emma appeared in the hallway in her pajamas, holding a glass of water, but clearly curious about the adults' conversation. Mr. Reynolds, she said with the directness only children can have, are you going to be okay? You look worried. Reynolds knelt down to her level. I'm a little worried about tomorrow's meeting, but having you and your mom with me makes me feel much stronger. Emma thought for a moment, then said seriously, Mom says when you're worried about something big, you should remember that most things look different in the morning. That simple advice made Reynolds smile. Your mom is really smart. I know, Emma replied confidently. Then with a child's intuition, she added, Mom likes you. You know, she smiles more when you're here. As Rebecca gently guided her daughter back to bed, giving a shy glance toward Reynolds, he realized that whatever happened in tomorrow's board meeting, the most important change had already happened. Not in company policy, but in his heart. The man who walked into Meridian Enterprises the next morning was completely different from the isolated, dynamic executive who had met the determined 7-year-old child in the lobby just a few months ago. He only hoped the change within himself would be enough to win the upcoming battle. The meeting room at Meridian Enterprises fell silent as Alexander Reynolds finished his presentation. Evidence of Harrington's discriminatory policies lay before each board member. Decades of systematic exclusion, methodically documented and undeniable. For the past 17 years, Reynolds said, his voice calm but laced with emotion, I believe I disappointed my wife, Caroline, by focusing too much on building this company. Today, I realize that my real failure is an institutional failure, a deliberate policy designed by Harrington to push working mothers out of our workforce. Harrington's face paled as Reynolds continued to reveal document after document. These are historical practices, he weakly protested. The times have changed. Have they? Rebecca interjected, standing next to Reynolds at the head of the table. Or are you just trying to keep things the same? She handed out additional reports pointing to the remarkable success statistics of the Family's First initiative. Evidence showing that supporting working parents not only did not decrease productivity, but actually increased it. James Whitfield cleared his throat. I propose that we officially adopt the Family's First initiative as the company's long-term policy and expand the initiative to all Meridian offices nationwide. I agree, said Martina Chen, a usually silent board member who had been following the process with increasing resolve. And I also continue to propose that Gerald Harrington be immediately removed from the board. Harrington shot to his feet. This is ridiculous. I built this company. As for the exclusion and prejudice, Reynolds finished it for me. The times have changed. The vote ended with an 11-3 majority in favor of removing Harrington and implementing the initiative long-term. As security escorted the former CEO out of the building, Reynolds felt a sense of relief, not just from the direct threat to his position, but from the deeper burden he had carried since losing Caroline and Lily. That afternoon, when news of Meridian's groundbreaking new policy was published in the financial press, Reynolds found himself alone in his office, staring at a photo of Caroline and Lily. For the first time in 17 years, he spoke to them without feeling guilty. He quietly said, "You'll accept it. I've wasted so much time, but maybe losing you did have some good in it." A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Rebecca appeared at the door with Emma standing beside her. "We brought some cookies to celebrate," Emma announced, holding out a box of pastries from a nearby bakery. "Mom says you won the big battle." Reynolds smiled. "We did it together." As Emma carefully arranged the pastries on the conference table, Rebecca moved closer to Reynolds by the window. "So what now?" she asked gently. "Professionally, we'll roll out the initiative nationwide and then expand it across the industry. I've already received 3 calls from competing companies asking for consulting." He turned back, facing her directly. "For me, it's a more complicated question." Rebecca's gaze locked onto him. "Really?" she asked. Reynolds took a deep breath. "For the past 17 years, I've lived in the past, building Meridian as a monument to what I lost, rather than using it as a foundation for something new." He glanced at Emma, who was carefully folding the napkins. "She and Emma reminded me that life goes on, that there could be a second chance if we're brave enough to seize it." "Do you have enough courage?" Rebecca asked gently. "Enough courage?" To answer, Reynolds reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped package. "This is from Caroline. She wanted someone like you to have it, someone who fights for the same things she believed in." Rebecca unwrapped it and found a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a compass. "She always said women need to have their own direction, not be directed by others," Reynolds explained. "Now it seems fitting." As Rebecca gently touched the bracelet with her fingers, Emma jumped in. "Are you two talking seriously?" she asked. "Your faces look serious." Reynolds knelt down to her level. "Actually, I was wondering if you and your mom would like to help me with a new project." Emma's eyes lit up. "Like the kids' space we designed? Even bigger." Reynolds smiled. "I'm thinking of starting a fund that helps companies create better workplaces for families." We need a director to make sure our ideas really work for kids. I can do it, Emma exclaimed. I think you can, Reynolds agreed, looking up at Rebecca. And we need a talented CEO who understands both company structure and family needs. Rebecca's eyes widened. Are you really serious about this? Reynolds confirmed. The Reynolds Family Fund will focus on transforming workplace culture nationwide. The Reynolds Family Fund, Emma repeated thoughtfully. Does that mean we'll be part of your family? The innocent question hung in the air, containing meaning beyond the understanding of a 7-year-old. Rebecca blushed. Emma, not yet, Reynolds gently interrupted, surprising himself with those words. But families will connect in many different ways over time. A year later, on that same day, the Reynolds Family Fund held its official launch in the same lobby where Emma had first come to the reception desk with her mother's investment portfolio. Now, hundreds of business leaders had gathered to learn about implementing progressive family policies in their companies. Alexander Reynolds stood at the podium, Rebecca by his side as CEO, and Emma proudly handed out program flyers to the attendees. A surprise guest changed everything. Reynolds spoke to the crowd. A 7-year-old girl taught a room full of executives what real courage looks like. He smiled at Emma, now standing between him and Rebecca. She reminded us that family is not a burden at the workplace. It's our greatest asset and our ultimate purpose. As the applause echoed through the foyer, Reynolds took Rebecca's hand, the compass charm on the silver bracelet catching the light as their fingers intertwined. Her gold ring on her left hand, a new version, matched the one on his. Ready for this new adventure? He asked softly. Rebecca smiled, leaning into his shoulder as Emma wrapped her arms around them both. We've been ready since the day you walked into our lobby. Sometimes the most important meetings of our lives are disguised as interruptions. Sometimes the best opportunities come in unexpected ways. And sometimes, just sometimes, the simple courage of a child can heal wounds we thought would last forever.